I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. Uprising in Egypt as its citizens take to the streets to demand a new government. We'll get a sense of what the future holds for the troubled nation. Plus, Brooklyn congregations unite to look ahead.
God put us together, and we decided not to fight, but to join forces.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets of Egypt's major cities to demand change. The uprising has prompted the government there to deploy the army to deal with civil unrest for the first time in decades. The U.S. State Department says charter flights got underway today to evacuate Americans trapped in Egypt. Meantime, anti-government activists there are calling for million-man marches in Cairo and Alexandria on Tuesday. This new political uprising comes on the heels of some religious unrest. Thousands of Egyptians took to the streets for the 7th straight day on Monday, demanding that President Hosni Mubarak, the man who has ruled Egypt for more than 30 years, step down.
Now they are not happy. They want him to leave.
Mubarak did make changes to his government over the weekend. For the first time ever, he appointed a vice president. He also swore in a new cabinet today, but for angry protesters, that is not enough.
Dear people of America, you have the right to choose your presidents. We need to have it once in our life. Once in our life, I want to choose my president.
But the U.S. government is now walking a diplomatic tightrope. Mubarak is technically a U.S. ally, making this a delicate situation for our government.
Egypt is a large, complex, very important country. I don't think the Egyptian people want to see what is a very clear effort to obtain political and economic rights turn into any kind of new form of oppression or suppression or violence.
While Egyptians as a whole began calling for change in a big way in recent days, Egypt's Coptic Christians have been doing so for some time. Christians in the country have long complained that the government does not do enough to protect them or to ensure them equal rights. It all came to a head when terrorists, reportedly linked to Al-Qaeda, orchestrated a bomb attack outside a Coptic church this past New Year's Day. 25 people died in that attack. Just after the attack, I spoke with Ed Clancy from Aid to the Church in Need. He told me that this latest attack was part of a pattern.
There's been an increase in activity of violence against Christian people and as well as churches. In fact, in the case in Egypt, they counted 52 acts of violence or terror against Christian churches that essentially have gone almost undealt with.
And he said the problems Christians have with the government in Egypt are similar to the issues the whole population has had to deal with.
The issue in Egypt now is the government has been for many years trying to quell violence and keep the peace, so to speak. But in some respects, they've also been causing it to go up because they do this thing where they'll go in and arrest people after some sort of action like today. And they will then broker a deal between the offending parties and the offended and say something like, oh, make peace and everything goes away. And they really don't deal with the undercurrents, with the level of violence that's underground.
Meantime, at the Vatican Sunday, Pope Benedict called for world peace and released doves into the wind. The doves, though, had other plans and took a U-turn. It was a reminder of just how difficult peace is to attain, especially in volatile areas like Egypt. And we'll have much more on how Christians in Egypt fit into the big picture when we come back. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Well, in Egypt, it seems revolution makes for strange bedfellows. Reports of Muslims and Christians marching together in the streets on the 7th day of massive demonstrations are widespread. Despite calls from Coptic officials to stay away from the protests, many Christians there are on the streets, and they're wondering what a departure from office by President Mubarak would mean for their future. Ahmad Shaheen, a professor of religion and conflict and peace building at the University of Notre Dame, joins me now by phone to discuss Egypt and the future of its Christians. Professor, thanks so much for joining us here today on Currents.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, of course, we know that the protesters are there out in the streets in Egypt, especially. I know literally hundreds of thousands in Cairo today, reports are saying now. They're calling for a lot of change. They're calling for President Mubarak to step aside. Where do Christians in the country fit into all of this?
Well, the Coptic Christian Egyptians are part and parcel, as you know, of the Egyptian society. They are the indigenous population. They have their own church, their native church, and their own patriarch. It's a separate Orthodox church from Eastern Christianity and from, of course, Roman Catholicism. Now, where do they fit? Of course, the Egyptian Copts, like the rest of the Muslim Egyptians, they have been sharing the same grievances and complaints about Mubarak's regime. Specifically, as you know, over the past few years, there have been a lot of grievances and complaints expressed by the Christian community in Egypt regarding what they perceive as a denial of some of their legitimate and basic rights, primarily the issue of the freedom to build churches and also to be appointed to top-level positions in the state. In general, the idea of revoking any kind of discriminatory policies against the Copts. So I'm sure they fit very well within the overall demands of the Egyptians for a free democratic society or transition where equality will be granted to everyone, and also where citizenship, and this is a very key concept here, where citizenship would be the criteria for responsibilities and rights within the new democratic system.
Sure. Now, of course, you just mentioned what the Christians want to happen there, but there is no real guarantee at all that that is going to happen, that the situation for Christians in Egypt would get better if President Mubarak is out of office. I mean, isn't there that possibility that it could get worse?
I don't believe so, and of course, I mean, this is not wishful or hopeful thinking, but I think for the past few years, the Christian Copts have articulated many of their demands, and I think they managed to build a critical mass even among Muslims for embracing many of their demands. The events of the New Year Eve, New Year, and the explosion of a Christian church in Egypt, as a matter of fact, put the Christian demands on the table very forcefully and very strongly, and to a large extent mobilized the support of the rest of the Egyptian community behind their Coptic countrymen and women. So I don't think actually any regime or a future regime that is different from Mubarak's might be or should be worse for the Christian Copts. They have been for decades complaining about the denial of their basic rights, some of what they perceived as discrimination policies or discriminatory policies against them. And I think if we are talking about here, we are of course talking hypothetically that about a democratic transition, a democratic society, so the Egyptian Copts would be treated as exactly their Muslim counterparts.
Right. Now, of course, you mentioned the New Year's bombing of the church there in Alexandria. Do you think that this uprising will bring sort of the plight of Christians back into the spotlight in Egypt, perhaps?
I think it will put the concept of citizenship and equal rights on the table extremely forcibly and strongly. Because, look, the idea of discrimination, and I'm not trying actually to undermine the grievances of the Copts. They have very legitimate grievances, and the majority of the, if not all, the Muslim community, the educated, the highly aware community, support them in their legitimate rights. We're talking about building churches, repairing churches. We're talking about the idea of appointment to high-level positions as equal citizens as the rest. So I think they will put the changes will put the concept of equal rights, citizenship strongly on the table. And I hope and I think the Copts will benefit from this development, for sure.
All right. Well, Professor Iman Shaheen, thank you so much for joining me here today on Currents. Just out of time, but we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents ahead. When we do return, there are signs of hope from the Middle East. We'll have that and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, different faiths with the same needs come together at a local parish. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, it is not a canceled exam or a snow day, but it is a reason to celebrate education. Catholic education, that is. With a Sunday kickoff, Catholic schools around the country began their celebrations at the 37th Annual Catholic Schools Week. This year's theme, Catholic Schools, A+ for America, celebrates the fact that Catholic schools are an A+, little play on words there, for the nation. Now, if you want to know what's happening at Catholic schools in the Diocese of Brooklyn, be sure and pick up the latest issue of The Tablet at your local parish. And be sure to watch us tomorrow here when we will have as our guest the Diocese Superintendent for Schools, Dr. Thomas Chadzuko. Well, turning now to California, where students in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles are probably not celebrating after it was announced that most elementary schools there will add 20 more days to their academic calendars. Starting this fall, the school year will begin in mid-August and it will end in late June. Los Angeles Archbishop Cardinal Roger Mahoney said the additional class time would be beneficial to students and would help them become more competitive in today's global market. Well, from Iraq now, the Catholic Church has announced that it is building a university and a hospital in the northern part of that country. An archbishop there said the goal of the twin projects is to provide jobs, training, and other opportunities for Christians flooding into the region. Thousands of Christians are heading there to escape violence elsewhere in the country, particularly in Baghdad and Mosul. Well, turning now to the Vatican, there is still hope for Christian-Muslim dialogue despite the recent decision by Muslim scholars in Egypt to suspend their talks with the Holy See. The head of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue says he believes the boycott can be resolved. He says he's still scheduled to meet with Muslim academics from Cairo in February. Well, from South Africa now, Catholics there praying for former President Nelson Mandela after he was hospitalized for a respiratory illness. The 92-year-old Mandela was treated for an acute respiratory infection. He was released on Friday. He's recovering at home now. South African Cardinal Wilfred Napier says Catholics throughout the country are praying for Mandela's speedy recovery. Well, turning now to Pakistan, where the news agency Fides says terrorist groups are planning to assassinate a Catholic government minister because of his opposition to the country's blasphemy laws. Pakistan's Secret Service says it's deeply concerned about reports of an imminent attack on Shahbaz Bhatti, the country's minister for religious minorities. Bhatti has reportedly become a #1 target because of his commitment to abolish blasphemy laws. Well, meanwhile, a Vatican advisor has serious questions about a new study looking at the link between abortion and mental health. That study, conducted in Denmark and published in the New England Journal of Medicine, concluded that women were as likely to seek psychiatric help both before and after an abortion, but more likely to visit a psychiatrist after giving birth. An Italian doctor who's a member of the Vatican's Academy for Life says the results are misleading in its conclusion that women who have abortions are not at risk for later psychological problems. Well, now, you don't normally see the Vatican listed on crime rate polls, but there are some new numbers out there showing the Holy See has the highest misdemeanor crime rate in the world. The Serbian news website B92 reports 1,300 misdemeanors were committed in Vatican City last year. The Vatican only has 520 residents, but more than 18 million people visit each year. About 90% of the crimes are categorized as petty theft, most of which go unpunished, with perpetrators typically escaping to Italy. Well, meantime, exorcism, taking the top spot at the box office this past weekend. The Rite, which tells the story of a seminarian who goes to exorcism school at the Vatican, was #1 at the box office, the #1 grossing film in U.S. theaters in its debut weekend, taking in about $15 million. That film, starring Anthony Hopkins, is based on the book of the same name. We actually just had the author here on the show a few days back. It tells the story of a real-life exorcist. Very interesting. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents coming up. When we return, different faiths with common needs come together at a local parish.
Many people in the community do not feel they have a voice. This gives them a voice.
Well, finally tonight, in his closing message for the week of prayer for Christian unity, Pope Benedict stressed that the search for that unity is a moral imperative. And although Christian unity has not yet been realized, Christians do collaborate. Here in Brooklyn, as a matter of fact, there's one coalition made up not just of different Christian denominations, but people of other faiths, including Jews and Muslims as well. And that diverse coalition is Brooklyn Congregations United. Just yesterday, they held a General Assembly at Holy Cross Parish in Flatbush to take a look back at 2010 and chart a course for 2011.
Brooklyn doesn't sleep. Brooklyn is awake. And Brooklyn is part of the change. And we are people of faith. We are people who want to live our life peacefully with justice, freedom. Because, you know, if you don't have justice, you cannot be in peace. And peace brings freedom. And freedom keeps you going and moving.
BCU stands for Brooklyn Congregations United, and we represent more than 20 interfaith congregations spread across Brooklyn. And the concept is to organize around issues of concern to our congregants and our communities throughout Brooklyn.
We're all one. We're all living here in Brooklyn. We all live here in the continental United States of America. And when you work together, the issues don't just affect one group of people. These economic issues that we face are affecting every facet of society. We've been organizing around things like immigration, housing issues, economic justice issues, health issues.
It's important for people to realize that in these difficult times, there are organizations that they can turn to that can give their thoughts and their concerns voice. And what really resonates with a lot of people with this organization is the fact that we're interfaith. And the concept is for you to act out your faith in the public arena, to act out your faith in action, and not just keep it inside.
God put us together, and we decided not to fight, but to join forces across languages and across faith traditions. And through what we would call aggressive nonviolent action for peace. We need other faith traditions in order to do that and accomplish that. We're trying to teach our entire religious world that you can work together.
Many people in the community do not feel they have a voice. This gives them a voice. And what community organizing is about is ensuring that all voices are heard. So there are many people who do not feel they have power, and once they join Brooklyn Congregations United and go to meetings such as this tonight, they realize they do have power, and they realize they have a prophetic voice.
Great gathering there. Well, that's it for this edition of Currents. Now, coming up tomorrow, the state of Catholic schools. We'll find out just what it is from the superintendent for the schools in the Diocese of Brooklyn. But until then, be sure to check us out online. We're over at currentsny.net on the World Wide Web. We're also there on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Currents. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.